Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We now proceed to the first panel on Hong Kong as an IPO hub. Mr. Lawrence Lee, Director of the Bauhinia Foundation Research Center and Chair of this panel, will introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I think as we were sitting here listening to the two keynote speakers just before the recess, some of my fellow advisors said to me, I think we have discussed this time and time again. I said, yes, but I guess what's happening in the financial market is that it's changing on a daily basis. And that's why I think it's probably worthwhile for us, and this is an important topic for Hong Kong as a whole, to revisit this particular topic again. As you can see from Professor Chan's speech, Hong Kong's IPO market, or rather it's looking at it as a more engrossing way, fundraising market has changed significantly since the first H-share listing. It has become one of the major center for Chinese company to raise funds. And more recently, obviously, as you can see, that it has also attracted some companies from a lot of the other emerging economies like Russian, Central Europe, Mongolia, but also it has now starting to attract some internationally renowned companies who have a lot to do with China to come around to this part of the world to raise it. So there's a lot of very exciting development. But at the same time, you can see that there are a lot of concerns which has been raised along the way, like, say, for example, the continuing liberalization of the financial markets in China, the impact of the Chinese government's policy on the continuing development of Hong Kong. You can also see that there are a lot of competition, very keen competition, coming from around the world, regionally and internationally. Also, you can probably appreciate there's a lot of also concern which are internally generated, like, say, for example, our regulatory regime, our high operating costs. So I guess this is a time again that as we are seeing that there are a lot of things happening in the market, and there's a lot of very inspiring changes in the sort of circumstances that we are operating. Here today we have assembled some very knowledgeable experts from very different backgrounds to give us some insight as to where do we go from here, or give us some pointers as to what should we be doing. And if you hear what Professor Chan is saying, that we can't be all things to everyone. So whether we agree with the way that he perceived the market, I think today we will probably hear from some of our experts. The first one is Mr. Don He. He's from the Hong Kong Institute of Monetary Research. He's a director at the Hong Kong Institute of Monetary Research and executive director of research at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority as well. Mr. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Cambridge and has published research on a wide range of economic matters, particularly macroeconomic and financial market issues in Hong Kong and China. Before joining the KMA in August 2004 as a head external, he was a staff member of the IMF Fund during 1998 to 2004 and a staff member of the World Bank from 93 to 98. Mr. He took up the position as head of economic research in the HKMA in May 2006 and was appointed to his current position in August 2009. So may I present Mr. He?
Good morning, everybody. Let me first thank the organizers for inviting me to this very interesting forum. I will actually take a slightly broader perspective on Hong Kong as an international financial center rather than focusing on its role as an IPO center. But I think that would have, I hope these broader perspectives will shed light on Hong Kong's future role as an IPO center. So let me touch on 3 issues. First of all, where does Hong Kong stand as an international financial center? I will take a sort of an economist perspective and see how do we measure a place as an international financial center. Then I will talk a little bit about the driving forces that will shape Hong Kong's status as an international financial center in the decade to come. And then we'll talk a little bit about the challenges in the road ahead. Now, this is a table. So, different people have different ways of measuring the importance of financial centers. And Hong Kong, as Paula said earlier, Hong Kong is now the 3rd major international financial center. So how do we measure that? People have different ways. For example, the City of London would do surveys. They ask people, ask the financial practitioners, which center do you think is the most important? So to an economist, I think the best measure of an international financial center is basically the main exporter of financial services. Okay, so this is the business receipts that this place derives from providing financial services to non-residents or to international investors and users of the financial center. So here you could see clearly, I think Chatham House would be very pleased that the United Kingdom or London is by far the major exporter of financial services. But Hong Kong actually is not bad, although it's still much smaller than the United Kingdom. United States, given its the size of the economy, of course is a very major exporter of financial services. But if we scale these absolute numbers by the city's GDP, the city, for example, in the case of the UK, will be London. In the case of the United States, will be New York City. Germany, it will be Frankfurt. Switzerland will be Zurich. And Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore. Then you could see that Hong Kong is very much on par with the United States and Singapore in terms of its measurement, in terms of its export of financial services. The other measure I like personally is the financial sector foreign direct investment. In what sense? In the sense that whether the foreign firms or international institutions have a large investment in this particular center. So here you could see that Hong Kong actually does very well. It's much, much larger than United States, for example, in attracting international financial firms to invest here. So this is the place, this measures how attractive this international financial center is to global institutions. So this is so Hong Kong compares very well here, but still it's smaller than for example Switzerland. Switzerland certainly is by far the most attractive place for global financial institutions to invest. Now, the other measure I like as an economist is the contribution of financial sectors to the local's GDP, for example, to output. This is the direct contribution. Of course, it doesn't measure the indirect contributions. For example, financial services bring along with it. For that, you have to probably do an input-output analysis. But here, thinking about the direct contribution, you could see that New York City certainly does extremely well. 26% of the GDP of the output in the city was contributed by the financial services. What stands out from this table is that the securities business in New York City is much larger than the other areas of financial services. If you compare Hong Kong, compared to Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, financial services contribute to about 15%. To the local's GDP. But here the banking sector is bigger than other markets. For example, securities. Of course, here there is a slight difference in terms of definition because we measure the banking sector. Here, these banks' securities businesses are also included in the banking sector contribution to the GDP. But even after taking that into account, you could see that the securities business here in Hong Kong is actually still smaller than the contribution by the banking sector. But it also says that in terms of the potential, the securities markets in Hong Kong would have a lot to grow in the future, in the years to come. For London, I don't have a breakdown of the different industries, but you know, its contribution to the local GDP is about 20%. In terms of employment, financial sector employment contribution to the local economies, you know, you could see that Hong Kong's the employment in financial services in Hong Kong is actually still smaller than that in New York or London, which is about 8 to 9%. Now, these are in terms of the picture of Hong Kong's financial services industry at the moment. But if we look at the broader business environment, you know, Hong Kong actually does really well. It's ranked probably the top in terms of the broader business environment. So here I quote the IMD World Competitiveness Report. So Hong Kong is consistently ranked the best in terms of tax structure, business infrastructure, market access, socio-economic factors, and the regulatory regime. So among all the developed and also Asian financial centers, Hong Kong does extremely well. That also, the message here is basically that if we maintain this favorable broader business environment, we build on the existing strength, and then there's a lot room for Hong Kong's financial services industry to grow. So let me turn to the second point that I would talk about a little bit about is the driving forces that will shape Hong Kong's status as an international financial sector in the decade to come. Here I would touch upon four major trends I believe are extremely important. First of all is the forces of globalization versus protectionism. The second one is a shift of global economic power from the west to the east, or from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And also intra-Asia trade and capital flows, that's the third point. And the fourth point I would touch upon, the Chinese capital and the renminbi going out. So these are, I think, are the four major forces, in my view, that would have important bearing on Hong Kong's future as an international financial center. So the first one, I think this is extremely important, particularly in the light of, or in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. That is the relative forces of globalization versus protectionism. So in the G20 communique, the global leaders stated that we will refrain from raising new barriers to investment or to trade in goods and services. That was in November 2008. While global leaders are fighting protectionist tendencies, politically the pressure to give in is increasing. And you know that in the United States, the unemployment rate will consistently stay at around 9%. So I think it's important for all of us involved to continue in whatever capacity to fight against protectionism globally to ensure global prosperity in the decade to come. That's an extremely difficult task, but I think we should treat that as an extremely important task. Don't be fooled by on the surface that everything seems to be going on as usual, but the undercurrents of protectionism are there, and we should keep on fighting them. So that's one important point I would like to make. The second point is relative economic importance, relative economic performance. So we have seen a multiple speed recovery globally in the aftermath of the financial crisis, and we are seeing a rebalancing of global economic power from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I believe that while the financial systems in the US and the EU are set to consolidate, so the picture I painted earlier, is where they have reached. But in the future, I think the relative speed of change will be quite different. I think the financial systems in Asia in general, and mainland China in particular, have huge potential to grow. And of course, in Asia, we see growing attractiveness of Asia to international investors to allocate their assets in the region. But of course, we need to manage short-term risks associated with volatile capital flows. That's, for example, in the HKMA, we have been very much sort of monitoring and tracking the risks and vulnerabilities associated with short-term capital flows. Now, the third point, I think that's going to be very important for Hong Kong's future particularly the premier financial center in Asia, is intra-Asia trade and capital flows. And we are going to see a lot more structural reforms to promote more balanced growth in the Asia region. And we're going to see a lot more intra-regional trade of goods and services for final consumption within the Asia region. You all know that Asia's trade in the past has been primarily destined to the developed markets in the US and the EU. But in the aftermath of the financial crisis, we already see incipient signs of inter-regional trade reoriented for final consumption within the region. So I think that trend is going to continue. Of course, we're going to see closer regional financial integration. Now, the fourth point is I think Norman and KC have talked about that, is Chinese capital and RMB going out. So we're going to see increasing outward direct and financial and portfolio investments by Chinese firms, funds, and individuals. We're going to see growing regional and international use of the renminbi and proliferation of renminbi financial products. Now, let me just show you a table which is very telling about the potential of Chinese capital going out, the potential. So where does China stand in international investment position? So this table show the at the end of 2009, how large is China's claim in terms of portfolio investment and FDI investment abroad. You could see that the portfolio asset, this is Chinese claim against the rest of the world in the sense that these are outflows, but it's the stock of outflows. It's only 5% of China's GDP, despite of course, the official assets, the official reserves are very big, like 50%, but the private sector, non-government claims against the rest of the world is only 5%. And FDI asset, this is ODI basically, outward direct investment, is only 5% as well, as compared to more than 30% in East Asia. And in the United Kingdom, 140%, 139% in terms of portfolio asset. So you could see that China's relationship, particularly on the outflow side with the rest of the world, is still very, very small. That means it has very large potential to grow. So I think all these forces will basically provide a very favorable background for Hong Kong to grow as a major entrepot of global fund flows, both ways. Okay, it's going to be on the buy side, for example, it's going to be a premier asset management center, and on the sell side, it will be a major fundraising center in Asia. Of course, Hong Kong will be also the premier offshore renminbi center. So let me conclude by mentioning a few challenges, I think, for the road ahead. So basically, we need to continue the efforts to enhance financial sector services development in Hong Kong, particularly by upholding Hong Kong's status as the world's freest economy and Asia's most international city. I think this is very important for Hong Kong to maintain its status as the international financial center for both the region and for China. And also, we need to keep Hong Kong's regulatory and supervisory standards at the cutting edge of international practice. So that's certainly at HKMA we very much recognize that's a task that we should always keep in our heart. And of course, we need to work very closely with the mainland to strengthen financial infrastructure linkages. And we also need to be very active and participate in the regional international forums. For example, Hong Kong is a member of the Basel Committee, and this is a very important forum for our voices to be heard and reflected in the ultimate capital rules, for example, governing the global banks. So Hong Kong has been very active in these sort of organizations. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. He, for your observations. Our next panelist is Ketsu Siadi, Vice President, Sydney S.W. Long Chair, Professor of Economics, Lingnan University. Ketsu is, as I said, the Chair Professor of Economics at Lingnan University. He's a Mexican national He earned his Bachelor of Philosophy and Doctor of Philosophy in Economics from the University of Oxford and spent the first 12 years of his professional career at the University of Warwick. In 1989, he was appointed Mexico's ambassador to GATT, G-A-T-T, and chief negotiator for Uruguay round. In 1993, he was invited to become the Deputy Director General of GATT and subsequently Deputy Director General of WTO until 1995. Professor Sietti joined the International Monetary Fund as Assistant Director in the IMF's Policy Department in 1998. He then moved in late 2001 to the Fund's Fiscal Affairs Department as Senior Advisor. In this capacity, he provided extensive technical assistance to countries around the world on issues covering a range of fiscal policy and practice, from tax and expenditure policy to budget system and administration. In very distinguished career. May we have Professor Sietti?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank the Bauhinia Foundation very warmly, as well as Chatham House, for this invitation to be able to share views with such a distinguished group, and indeed for bringing together this group to discuss the very important issues. I will take the opposite kind of stance compared to Dong He, who gave us a very useful broad view of Hong Kong as a financial center and where it may go and what is the potential ahead. And I will just look at the particular area that I believe is of great interest to Hong Kong, which is IPOs. So I really want to concentrate on that. And even within IPOs, I will not try to give a general kind of overview, but to concentrate on issues that I think are worth discussing. I hope you will not mind if I try to be specific in my views and even provocative perhaps, all with the warmest of intentions. I am an extremely proud adopted citizen of Hong Kong, if I may say, and as such I really want to contribute to asking the hard questions. What are the issues that Hong Kong may need in this particular area to focus on, to continue to do as fantastically as it has been doing in the APOs area in particular, and as a financial center generally. So I will not recount the success that has already been recounted very nicely by Professor Casey Chan in particular, and then indirectly also by Mr. Norman Chan, and then also by Tong Hee. The experience we have had, Hong Kong has had with IPOs, it's certainly a major point of pride of Hong Kong as a financial center, as an international financial center, with a fantastic success and also strategic focus for the development of Hong Kong into the future. It became, to everybody's surprise in the rest of the world, New York, the former king of IPOs, and London, the more recent king of IPOs, earlier this decade. Hong Kong came to the very top in 2009, 2010, raising a fantastic amount of money. I just have a little table here of some of the top players. The experience in 2011 is mixed. The first quarter was disappointing, prompting people to begin to suggest that the party is over for Hong Kong. But the second quarter, which is not over yet, has been very good. So it's not clear. So hopefully the momentum continues, but with important diversification, which is what I'm going to be talking about, this diversification. The main point that has been discussed and that I want to talk about is the fact that China inevitably will be running out of large state-owned enterprises to do mega IPOs, which has been the main point of richness and success for Hong Kong in the area. And as China runs out of large IPOs, is Hong Kong doomed to have to look elsewhere into other areas of activity because IPOs are just not going to be of the same kind of caliber? And give up this kind of crown Hong Kong has had in the last few years after its glory days. So that is the question, okay? What's happening with China and how does this look like impact in Hong Kong? And my quick answer is that no, not necessarily is the IPO party, if I may say, over. Not at all. The sector is very important, and it is very important directly as business and indirectly as a sector that is an important market maker through subsequent development of the stock exchange, secondary trading, and general development of the financial center in many ways. Okay? So it is a very important sector, and I do believe strongly that the party is not necessarily over, even if major IPOs from China begin to dwindle, as it's inevitably going to happen. But, it's okay, thank you. The question is, where will the activity come from if the IPOs begin to leave the center stage they have had? Where will the activity come from? Okay? So we have conducted some research. I'm drawing partly from that and partly new work that I have done in particular, trying to prepare, update, and so on for our discussion this morning. In general, the kind of picture that I want to give is that the flip side of the huge success Hong Kong has had in attracting these mega IPOs is that it has benefited from that hugely. It has demonstrated, as Professor Chan said, that Hong Kong has a great capacity in terms of human resources and ability to attract big money from around the world, has a great capacity to launch no matter what huge IPO, technically and financially. Okay? So all this is a major kind of backbone to anything we have to discuss here. Okay? But nevertheless, stable growth into the top leagues as a financial center for Hong Kong, and in particular, preservation of its position into the future as the prime IPO center for Asia, and certainly for the world recently, requires us to look at two questions. And in this regard, in our research, we have identified two areas of concern, two areas that I call bias. Okay? Bias is a bit of a euphemism. You could say weaknesses. Okay? Challenges. Okay? It's not trying to be pessimistic. It's saying where to put the emphasis to ensure that the success continues and that we move to the next stadium. These two biases are, the first one, that Hong Kong, despite the fact that it is the most international financial center in Asia in many respects, including its catchment of financing from around the world, so Argentinian and African investors do work in placing their money here. So despite that, on the offer side, in terms of the listings being attracted, Hong Kong, as most of Asia, is not very international. It only has 18 international listings by May 2011, actually by today. That's the first bias I want to touch on. And the second one is that also in terms of the Chinese companies that have been attracted to do their IPOs here, despite the big business of the mega IPOs, Hong Kong has been relatively unsuccessful, or less successful than it might be, with smaller private and high-tech firms from China. Three categories that overlap, but each of them looked at statistically separately. Smaller firms, private firms, high-tech firms. Okay? Let me look at these two biases quickly, each of them. This table is a bit of a summary of the Hong Kong listings and then also Singapore and Korea at different points in the last 10 years. You can see that of Hong Kong's listings, by the end of last year, Hong Kong had 17, it's now 18 as I said. 2010 was extremely good because it increased the foreign listings from 11 to 17, that's huge growth. Okay? But nevertheless, look at the bottom of the table and looking at Korea. Well, Korea also has 17, Seoul. Of course, Hong Kong's 17 international are more international because those of Korea are mostly from the region, almost exclusively, whereas Hong Kong's are a mixture of international firms from the region, international meaning not China and not Hong Kong, not Greater China, in the case of Hong Kong. In the case of Korea, international includes China, but I'm looking at outside East Asia, it has only 1, and foreign listings, it has 17. Okay? But then if we look at Singapore, up again, if we look at Singapore, then the picture looks a bit more concerning. As I said, Hong Kong has increased its international listings hugely in the last year, but Singapore has had, in 2009, over 300 foreign listings, which of course includes Chinese. But even if you exclude Chinese, which is about 150, in terms of purely foreign listings, not from the region, extra regional listings, it has 43. It's a very impressive number. Okay? So it has 150 from China, a number from Hong Kong and Taiwan, and others from Southeast Asia, Indonesia, whatever. So you can tell whatever stories, and very valid stories about the catchment area of Singapore being, of course, ASEAN countries. That is true and that is appropriate. But foreign listings have not been attracted in Hong Kong anywhere near what Singapore has achieved. Okay? Is that a problem? Well, to the extent that there is big business with mega IPOs, it is not a problem. I also hold that the IPO business is likely to have a great deal of mileage left also, because not only the largest central government-controlled firms, but firms at all levels. Provinces, municipalities have scores of companies that may, if Hong Kong plays its cards well, may continue to bring a lot of business to Hong Kong. Okay? So there's a great deal of business from China that Hong Kong may hope to get. But New York City also has an enormous economy behind it. It's hinterland, American IPOs and American companies to bring business to New York. And nevertheless, it has emphasized throughout its history the international dimension, and it has almost 500 foreign listings. So they have a huge private market, hinterland, but the world is also very important for them. London has over 600 listings. So it's very important for Hong Kong to try to take a share in this international business that it has only started to attract really in the last 12 months. It's now very exciting times. Okay? So I contend that stable growth into the top league requires the international dimension to be tackled better, which of course is the rule number 1 for good risk management, okay? To diversify your eggs. Now let's come quickly to the second bias that I mentioned, which is the relatively lower success in attracting smaller and private firms from the mainland. In this regard, we conducted a very major kind of piece of research. The data was not available, so we had to put together data. We created a consolidated database. We looked at every Chinese firms doing IPOs over a 5-year period, and looked at many variables, including who sits in their boards, are they controlled by a minister or that kind of thing, to examine the political connection, and also the choice by the firm, independent firms, big, small, what sector, and so on. And our main findings are, both of them strong statistically. One, that central government influence, through a range of indicators that we use for that, seems to be an important reason why many large IPOs have come to Hong Kong. Okay? And more importantly for my point today, that, as I said, smaller firms, private firms, and high-tech firms have much preferred to go to Singapore and to New York. And I just say, I don't understand why there's a tendency to think that Singapore is small. It's not quite a match. I think it's a very significant contender for any business in the region. Of course, Hong Kong has a special position. It's stronger, it's better. But one has to be aware where the competitive challenge may be and what can be done about it. So is this a problem? Well, as I said, IPOs might be running out, but there's no, IPOs by state-owned enterprises, by large firms from the government, may be running out, but there's no reason on earth not to have the highest level of optimism for Hong Kong in Chinese IPOs in the future. Why? Well, it's a huge country with enormous growth ahead of it. So there'll be companies and companies coming into the market, including thousands that still don't exist today. Companies coming to the market, those companies moving into market financing in the stock exchange. The level is not only growth and company growth, but financial deepening. The level of financial deepening in China is still very shallow. Over 85% of company financing is done by banks. So that has a lot of room to grow. So companies in scores, in big numbers, will come to do IPOs, and Hong Kong has every opportunity to catch that. And is not necessarily tapping sufficiently this market. Now, I want to quickly correct what I'm saying, because in the last 12 months in particular, there have been two areas of very exciting development where Hong Kong is succeeding. Okay? These are in the mining sector, mining industry, and the consumer product sector, in particular luxury goods. In both of which, a niche seems to be arising, and Hong Kong is eager, quite rightly, to capture that niche and establish itself. Mining, I will just be very brief, but last year there were some firsts for Asia, for East Asia, of companies that never came to this part of the world, and they came to this part of the world for the first time to Hong Kong. These were a Russian company, UC Rusal, a Canadian mining company, a Mongolian mining company. Then many other companies are now in the wings, coming to Hong Kong, intending to come to Hong Kong from Russia and other CIS countries, Brazil, Africa. The mention of Australia is because an Australian company had just announced this weekend that they intend very strongly to come. So as we speak, maybe by tomorrow, I should also have some other piece of good news. So this is very much developing very nicely. But the question is this a trend? Will the trend get deeper? Hong Kong is still far smaller in mining financing than the major centers such as Toronto and Australia. Okay? The market has always been there. So how to make it a trend, how to really be a rival for them, instead of just capturing some firms that choose to come in this direction. Another niche emerging is, as I said, consumer products, and many luxury firms have come to Hong Kong or are coming to Hong Kong. And again, why is that and how to attract them? Well, notice that all these kinds of companies are similar to the areas that Hong Kong has before last year not been very good at. So what exactly might need to be done in order to continue to attract these firms? Well, they are coming because of China, and that's not going to change. But is there anything else that can be done, that should be done? And here, this is where I promised you to be a little bit provocative. This is where I believe that the strong attention placed to the mainland's large SOE IPOs has perhaps diverted attention from things that should be done and that need to be done, that can be done to continue to be good at IPO competition. Singapore has not had the benefit of such large IPOs and has had to become competitive directly. So Singapore has been more successful in the international competitive arena for medium-sized IPOs, which Hong Kong has not. Okay? What could be the measures that Hong Kong has not done in this perhaps fascination with large IPOs from the mainland? Well, there may be many issues. It has not been political lack of interest, because certainly the government is very interested in attracting IPOs from around the world. It's not lack of capacity. Hong Kong is very attractive in every respect. There may be other candidate explanations you may offer, but the one that my colleagues and I have identified is concerns the listing rules in Hong Kong. The listing rules in Hong Kong, by and large, were introduced in the 1980s, primarily to filter Chinese firms that were relocating to the Cayman Islands and elsewhere, and that were coming with substandards into Hong Kong and creating dangers for the public. And that was a very valid motivation. So high standards were placed and to control that. But since then, everything has changed a lot. It's almost 30 years, and the rules have not been reviewed in a systematic way. So there's a deficit of review of listing rules, which are often old, sometimes inconsistent, not very clear. Okay? Secondly, there's a post-listing lack of clear rules, post-listing regime, that because Hong Kong doesn't have that, good controls on the conduct of companies already listing, which means that Hong Kong has to place very high standards of precautionary supervision on the initial entry of firms into Hong Kong. So very high standards, higher than London's, higher than New York's. Okay? So if you don't have rules to watch what people do once they are in your house, you have to be very strict at the door. And that's what Hong Kong has been doing. Very strict at the door. This should be revised. Looking at the rules at the door, the listing rules, and the post-listing rules. Hong Kong has high thresholds, high listing costs, old and unclear listing rules in many respects, and all of these are easier to navigate by large SOEs from China. They don't have a problem to deal with those problems. But smaller companies say, sorry, that's not for me. They don't like ambiguities, they don't like discretion, so they go away. So if we want to attract these smaller firms, we need to develop more modern rules, more objective rules, and I believe there is a pressing need for a revamped framework for all this, and Hong Kong will surely continue to be the top of the pack in the world and certainly in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sally. We now turn to the next panelist, Mr. Stephen Zhang, Dean of School of Business of the Hong Kong Baptist University. He's also the Professor Chair of Finance at the Hong Kong Baptist University. He holds an advisory and adjunct professorships at Fudan University and Shanghai Jiao Tong University, respectively. His major research interests include corporate finance, investment, and financial market development. He is the chairman of the advisory committee, Enhancing Self-Reliance Through District Partnership Program of the Home Affairs Department, consultation panel of the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, as well as supervisory committee of the Asian Bond Fund, Hong Kong Bond Index Fund of the Hong Kong HKMA. He was voted the BVS in 2009 and was appointed JP in 2007. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to thank the organizer, Bauhinia Foundation and Chatham House for putting this panel together. I'm glad to be part of the panel. The topic is the future development of Hong Kong equity markets. Let me recap some facts. Hong Kong IPO fundraising size ranked first in the world in 2009 and 2010. And we saw a number of Chinese SOEs and increasing non-exchange mainland private enterprises listed in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has been the major fundraising center for Chinese enterprises. What we have missing is during the past 15 years since the listing of the first share, Qingdao Pier, we saw a significant improvement in corporate governance practices of Chinese enterprises listed in Hong Kong that I'm going to show you in the later part of my presentation. And Hong Kong also has a very good corporate governance standard in Asia-Pacific region that I'm going to show you also in the second part of my presentation. The question that we need to ask is how sustainable the IPO business in the future for Hong Kong. What kind of IPO or listed company that we want them to be listed in Hong Kong. As a professor, we are very good in selling dreams and fantasy. So my vision of Hong Kong equity market, Hong Kong should be a prime market for quality companies, mainland and international, to raise funds. that I'm going to show, as I promised, I'm going to show you the improvement on corporate governance practice for X-share companies Hong Kong. Actually, this part of work is sponsored by Hong Kong Institute of Directors. The whole assignment is to assign a corporate governance score for major listed company in Hong Kong. We started our exercise the first time in 2002, second time 2005, and the third time 2008. We rate company based on publicly available information, and we rate the 4 major index constituent stocks. These indexes are Hang Seng Index, we call it blue chip stock, the mid cap Hang Seng Hong Kong Composite Index, and then the red chip stock and the X-share stocks. In 2002, we ranked 168. 2005, we ranked 174. In 2008, we ranked 146. You can imagine that each of these companies will be assigned a score to signify, to correspond to the governance practices these listed companies have. And our scorecard, or our scoring systems, are according to the 5 OECD corporate governance principles. And these 5 areas are right of shareholders, equitable treatment of shareholders, role of stakeholders, disclosure and transparency, board responsibility. In 2002, we have 86 criteria. In 2008, we expanded the criteria to 133. I'm not going to bore you with the result. Let me show you briefly. This is the result 2002. This is Hang Seng Index, our constituent company, the best performing company, the worst performing company. This is X-share Index, the best performing company and the worst performing company. You can see there's a huge distance between the blue chip stock and X-share company for the year 2002 in terms of corporate governance practices. This is the result 2008. Again, X-share. This is the blue chip stocks here. The best performing company, the worst performing company, and this is X-share Index, the best performing company and the worst performing company. We do see a significant improvement in X-share listed in Hong Kong. This is we only publicize the best performing company in our study because of personal safety reason, and we also list the company by alphabetical order. I'm not doing any publicity for this company. They don't pay me to do publicity. I show you the table. This is the best performing company 2002. These guys are the best guy, 10 best guy. The blue chip stocks, X-share company, none. 2008, X-share stocks. This really shows Hong Kong has been the major fund listing center for the Chinese enterprises. And also we have ignored the fact that by listing here, we saw and also we witnessed an increasing or improving corporate governance practices for these mainland Chinese companies. Well, the second study that I've done, Hong Kong Corporate Governance Standard, comparing with all the Asian Pacific market. We call this a macro corporate governance scorecard. The project was commissioned by PECC. We done it in 2005, 2006, with a Korean guy called Ha Sung Zhang. This is the papers published in this journal. Well, the whole study is consisted of two surveys. The first survey, based on the 5 OECD principles, we rate the rules and regulations on corporate governance on 9 Asian Pacific equity markets. Again, these 5 principles: right of shareholders, equitable treatment of shareholders, And the research team consists of representatives from each East Asia economies, including China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, and Thailand. They are from institute directors or research institutes, and also we verify the finding from the regulatory agents of these economies. This is the first survey. So we look at the rule and regulation. We assign them a score. The second survey of this study is we actually seek the market perception on corporate governance practices from fund manager and analyst, with investment exposure in the region. So we distribute questionnaire through Investment Fund Association to seek their view on how good these markets are in terms of corporate governance practices. It's 9 East Asian market. The objective is the same. We look at the same thing from 2 different angles. The first one is on existing regulatory framework on corporate governance. The second is on investor perception, where when these guys invest in the market, how they perceive this market in terms of CG practices. The rule of regulation with 103 questions, 103 criteria, 55 of them are used in the scoring, and 48 of them are used for confirmation. And this is the distribution of questions in these 5 areas. And people argue that once we have 5, corporate governance principles, these principles should allow for a different rating. So we have 2 rating systems, in assigning the score for each of these markets. The first part of the study I show you is actually we assign a score to each listed company. The second part is we assign a score to each market in terms of rules and regulation. For the first rating, this is a 9 market. In terms of rules of regulation, China, Philippines rank the first because they have tons of rules and regulations, and Singapore ranked the last. Second rating, when we assign different rating for these 5 OECD principles, again, China, Philippines ranked the first, Singapore ranked the last. Hong Kong ranked a little bit better. The second survey, we distribute questionnaire to fund manager and analysts in the fund management house. We only receive 25 questionnaire back. Well, the fund manager, analysts, they're very busy in making money. They don't have time to fill in questionnaire. The surveys, we have 5 questions. We ask them to rate this market on a 1 to 5 point scale. These are the questions. Well, a question like, how do you evaluate overall quality of corporate governance practices in this country? I'm not going to bore you with these questions. Actually, the whole list of questions available in the papers. When we score them, look at the average of these 10 questions for these 9 East Asian markets. Singapore, Hong Kong ranked number 1 and 2. China, Indonesia ranked at the end of the table. This is in terms of investor perception on corporate governance on these markets, and that makes a lot of sense. Well, the remark is 2 surveys yield very different results. Reform not only in the rules and regulation, also in the implementation and enforcement, that we need a new kind of measure to measure in terms of implementation and enforcement. Let me conclude. Hong Kong should differentiate ourselves or our market from others as an exclusive club for quality listed company. Okay? If they're not good enough, ask them to go to other markets such as Singapore. And Hong Kong should build up our brand name with clear regulatory framework, provide adequate investor protection. Eventually, it will be beneficial to listed company to raise funds because that will lower the cost of capital. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang. Certainly a counterpoint. Now, may I turn to our last panelist for this session. He's from another part of the world, Mr. Robert Hodkinson. He works in the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales, Technical Strategic Department. Within this department, he performs research on 7 specialist faculties like audit, assurance, corporate finance, finance and management, financial reporting, financial service, IT, and tax. He currently leads the Institute Thought Leadership Program, focusing on corporate governance, professional ethics, and liability, sustainability, and business law. He was educated at Oxford, where he studied philosophy, politics, and economics. In 1980, he joined Arthur Andersen, where he qualified as a chartered accountant in 1983 and became partner in 1992. And he joined the Institute in October 2002. Since 2007, Robert has been a member of the board of International Federation of Accountants, and from 2000 to 2004 represented the UK accounting profession as a vice president of the European Federation of Accountants and as chairman of its audit working party. May I have Mr. Hawkinson?
Thank you very much. I hope you've absorbed all of that biography. If not, you can read it in the pack, and I'll test you later. I'm meant to say some things which you might not expect, and you might not even support, but I'm prepared to take that risk because I'm leaving Hong Kong tonight anyway. It seems to me, if you look in the timetable at the list of questions, they're actually the questions that they display we call it the anxiety of success. And it's great that people who are successful are really worried about whether they can continue their success. And I really understand this because I speak as a Manchester United supporter. And it's really good. So you ask about the sustainability of the IPO market in Hong Kong, and you're always a little bit worried because you can see there might be bad news and publicity in the United States about the latest mainland China companies. What will happen with the next IPO? You look at the statistics against other markets. You wonder about the relative position of different markets. You wonder about how important the secondary market is in enhancing liquidity and so on. Then there's a second question about how can you maximise the Hong Kong's position as an entry point into mainland China, and you're concerned about rivals. You're worried about whether the greater role for economic partnership under agreements with mainland China, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing in terms of enhancing your role as a gateway? You worry about where is the growth going to come from in the next 5 years. Should it be coming from the 12th five-year plan? Should it be looking at ceasing to be a point of entry to being a point of exit from China? Or should you be looking at other markets in the Far East? And what are the Hong Kong capacity bottlenecks? What do you need to do to make sure you're still attractive to those senior managers, the skilled people that you need? And you worry about the quality of your infrastructure. And in a way, it's great that you worry about those things, because in a way, if you're worrying about them, you'll probably maintain a position of success. And let me just kind of analyse some of these factors. First of all, there are things which are sort of in your own hands. If you want to decide you're going to invest in certain public goods, then you can invest in education to make sure that you attract and retain incoming high-end workforce. If you want to invest in better transport and housing, anti-pollution measures, the environment, these are things which are kind of in your own hands. I understand that there's public spending limits on this, but I just look out of the window and see that you have a great ambition to invest on a grand scale. There are some things which you don't need to worry about at all. There are either strengths which you can't do anything about or weaknesses you can't do anything about, and that's geography. So you're always going to be well positioned, I think, for China, probably slightly better than New York or London. I think. I don't think that's going to change. And you always, despite the efforts to build out into the water, there is a certain geographic limit on the scale of the place that I understand. So, in a way, those two features of the things you can invest in public goods and the geography, they're kind of givens. Maybe the difficult thing, I'll put in a third category, and there's just to show that I can speak in more than one language. I won't speak in Cantonese, I'll speak in French. There was actually a rather infamous French politician who said, les régimes se succèdent, mais la géographie subsiste toujours. Regimes come and go, but geography is always there, and the geography of Hong Kong will always be there, but there's issue about regimes, and I'm aware this is a sensitive issue, but let me, as something of an outsider, raise it, that part of your competitive edge is around the one country, two systems situation. And it might even be seen as the generator of a golden age, because that role as being a gateway or a window on the world for China comes from the fact that actually you are incredibly strong in terms of openness of markets and the institutions which underpin effective markets. And we can list all those, and we know what we're talking about. It's the rule of law, it's independent courts, it's a predictable tax system, it's all the things you know about intellectual property protection and so on. And actually, if you want to sort of poster child issues for those two questions of openness and infrastructure, then you can look at currency convertibility and quality of, and it's something you might have thought I was going to talk about a lot, corporate governance and financial reporting. And here it seems to me there's a bit of a dilemma in your position as Hong Kong, because that special place you have depends upon the fact that you are champions of openness and market infrastructure. And that competitive edge depends upon being part of a system which has aspirations for openness and market infrastructure but isn't quite there yet. And so there's a kind of dilemma in terms of long-term success, that actually if you were to end up with one system and you were to lose your openness and market infrastructure, then it's all over as an international financial centre. But also, in a way, if the rest of China becomes converted to these ideals, then maybe it's also all over, because you're quite small in relation to China, and surely the mainland would always do it at home. And that seems to me is a real dilemma, and I apologise if I'm being really brutal about this, because you, as people who are champions of openness and the essential infrastructure of a successful market economy, can hardly say our future success depends upon denying it to the rest of China. So let me put a challenge to you that maybe for the real long-term success of Hong Kong, you need to think beyond mere openness and, let's call it, the market infrastructure, the appropriate legal system, the access to law, rule of law, and maybe have a new aspiration. Let me suggest a new aspiration, and that would be to articulate a better vision than anybody else about what better financial services look like. And if you go back to my rather awkward reference to Manchester United, this might be called the Barcelona strategy. Yes, everyone else saw that final and saw that Manchester United were, okay, might have been a regional champion in a place called the United Kingdom, but weren't actually best in the world. Now, what might this mean, this articulating a better vision for financial services? Well, financial services is really the means by which we facilitate the growth and success of the real economy. Paolo talked earlier about this rebalancing, and there's a feeling in the world that we need to get a better understanding of the relationship between financial services and the real economy. And really, financial services needs to make its case. And it maybe needs to make its case in China. Because financial services is there to do something essential, really essential, which is balancing the long-term economic behaviour and our aspirations for long-term success with the fact that we're all inevitably quite short-term and we're worried about what happens here and now. And that's what financial services do. Banking sector performs the miracle of maturity transformation, which enables institutions to lend long while borrowing short. And it does that through trust, building trust. The securities markets do that by providing long-term funding for companies whilst allowing investors to operate in liquid markets where they can change their positions short term. And insurance and derivatives markets do that by protecting people against the long-term fears that might prevent them from doing things in long-term economic interests. So that's what financial services is about. This is just my attempt to articulate what the vision for financial services is. And if you can persuade people that that financial service activity is really valuable and is really important to economic success, then you might achieve something which at the moment New York and London are struggling to do. We've had a lot of focus on China, but I would invite you to look at some of the challenges facing your established international financial centre competitors. If in the UK, the chairman of the FSA can question the social utility of financial services. If in the United States, Paul Volcker can say that the only piece of financial innovation to benefit humanity has been the ATM. There's a fundamental doubt about what we're talking about with international financial centres. Now, if you can articulate this vision, there are some great benefits. First of all, you avoid the hypocrisy of wanting openness and the rule of law for yourselves, but not wanting it for the rest of China, because actually that would undermine your competitive position. You make the political disaster of one country, one system turning into the wrong system. You avoid the problem that you face if the one system is actually the one that you espouse, because it might mean, and I got this quotation from one of our members, so I'll blame him, that Hong Kong in the long term becomes the Monaco of the Far East. You might know, I mean, there's lots of wealthy people living in nice flats, apartments, looking over a nice coastline with yachts there and a big asset management industry, but not basically the engine of financial activity. And if you manage to articulate this vision, you might actually overcome your dependence on geography and actually have something to offer the rest of the world, which the other global financial centres struggle to articulate. And I think I take a leaf out of what Casey Chan said, that Hong Kong has been the test bed by which the Chinese mainland has looked at whether things work, whether financial services work. And wouldn't that be an ambitious challenge to set yourself to show Chinese mainland that actually financial services serve a bigger social purpose? Now, the evidence for all of this, I've been billed as somebody who's from outside here, but I have to say that Hong Kong is the second city of the ICAW. I don't know, people might put their hands up if there are ICAW members in the audience. Oh, there are supposed to be some, but Hong Kong, oh, yes, there's one. Hong Kong is our second city after London. And I spoke to some of them, and this kind of rung true a little bit in what they said, but I've also added to it some work ICAW and its thought leadership work, that we have been concerned for several years now, not just about studying the market, the foundations for successful markets, but also we have a program at the moment looking as to whether the global financial crisis will have a legacy in terms of a new era for financial services, a new articulation of what financial services are about. And we have a program of thought leadership about how do you inspire confidence in financial services, so that lenders are responsible, institutions are responsible, and consumers of financial services are responsible and understand the social role of financial services. And we're also in this aim of articulating a true purpose of financial services, are joint sponsors with, of all organisations, the World Wildlife Fund on an institution called the Financial Innovation Lab, to look at how financial services can win the hearts and minds of the population as a whole, the economy as a whole. You might object to this and say, well, there's a long time. It's a long time before China has fully embedded rule of law and openness. If there's a long time, you might need a long time to help articulate this vision, and we always know outside China that you think long term. You might also say, but this is Hong Kong, boy, calm down. Hong Kong is about making money. Well, I have to say that making money ultimately depends upon articulating this purpose for financial services. Let me give you perhaps a completely inappropriate analogy. But if you go back to what I said financial services is about, it's about playing on the fears and insecurities of the population and giving them peace and confidence to live their lives. There was a lot of debate in Europe for many centuries as to where the centre of Christianity was. And you might say religion does the same thing. It plays upon the fears of humanity and appropriates economic rents from calming people's fears. But if people see that all that's happening is you're extracting economic rents and not giving them peace and security, they can emasculate you. And it might well be that Rome is the centre of Christendom, but it's not really the centre of, this is no religious comment here, I'm just talking about of economic power. It's not what New York is in terms of world power. So that ability to show you're not just extracting economic rents, and believe me, in the UK and the US, when people look at the profits of banks, the market capitalisation of banks, and the remuneration of bankers, they think this is a system that exploits our fears to appropriate economic rents, and that is not sustainable. So, let me summarise. You have the anxiety of success. That's a great thing, and you should continue to be worried day to day as to whether you're being outmanoeuvred. But you might also just lift your eyes to the horizon and say, is there something that we can do which will position Hong Kong as a truly global leader and actually help New York and London discover something that they're struggling with, and maybe positioned here on the edge of China, you're in a great position to do that. I'd welcome your thoughts as to how you achieve that. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert. I think we have still have a few minutes that we can entertain some questions from the floor, if there is. Yes, the gentleman in the middle and with the glasses. Can you identify yourself when you ask the question, if I may?
A subsidiary of the China National Petroleum Corporation. Thank you very much for a very diverse set of very thoughtful and entertaining comments from the panelists. As I see it, there are three themes in today's conference. One is Hong Kong as a fundraising center. The other is Hong Kong as an offshore renminbi center. And the third one, in ascending order of broadness, Hong Kong as a financial center. Now, I understand that the panelists and other commentators have spent quite a bit of time on the first theme, which is Hong Kong as an IPO or fundraising center. But I believe that a financial center is not limited to this. The fundraising center is only one element in a financial center. If we look at London or New York City or even Shanghai, these centers act also as risk management centers and offer other kinds of services. They also have commodities markets and derivatives markets side by side with the IPO market. So I want to throw this question to the panelists. What do you think, if we go beyond the concern for the IPO market in Hong Kong, is there a strategy, mid-term to long-term, for Hong Kong developing its commodities and derivatives markets, or developing as a financial center which is not limited to this vision focusing just on IPO? Thank you very much.
I think, Mr. Donahue, you probably want to answer this question, as your analysis was the broadest.
Thank you. I think that's an important question, because people have the perception that Hong Kong is somewhat very much concentrated on IPO activities. But as my tables show, Hong Kong is actually doing pretty well in the broadest measure of what a financial sector does, particularly as a major exporter of financial services and as a major location of business for global financial institutions. Certainly, I'm not an expert on IPOs, so I spoke from a broader perspective. But I think, for example, from HKMA's point of view, our effort has been to promote financial stability in Hong Kong, and also in terms of, the two buzzwords are stability and development, right? Stability comes first, and then in terms of development, we have been doing a lot of policy work to make Hong Kong into the premier renminbi offshore center. So these efforts are all underway. So I mean, just to be, I think I basically agree with you that, you know, for a major international financial center, that we don't only have IPO activities, we have many other aspects of financial services. But you know, I think the important point the last panelist made is that, you know, for Hong Kong to be the premier financial service center, we have to make the case that these financial services are here to support the real economic activities, and you know, we are not making Hong Kong as an international financial center for the sake of it. Is to make it attractive for doing business, for getting finance on both the buy side and the sell side. It's a useful place to be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tony. I just want to supplement one quick observation, is that obviously the focus on the IPO market is basically, I think there's a very broad range of issues which needs to discuss as a financial center, so we just focus on it. I don't think we mean that being a financial center, you just need to care about your IPOs. But in any event, another question? Maybe this gentleman there.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a
Do you
question.
identify yourself, if I may? Can you?
Because I need to go back to mainland tonight. Okay.
All right. We understand.
A question for Mr. Hall. I'm from Guangdong Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Promotion, Financing and Listing Promotion Association. And we have a magazine, SMEIF, Investment and Financing. So as to the service, the financial service for the SME, I think both Hong Kong and China need to do something to help them to grow, because you know this is the source for the IPO for the next stage for the to be listed in Hong Kong. Okay, so we have observed that some bank from Hong Kong, they have do something in mainland, in Guangzhou and in other cities. They're helping some SME to grow in inside mainland China. So do you have any suggestions and appearance that Hong Kong can play a bigger role and do more to help the SME in China mainland? Yeah. For Mr. Hall.
I'm not really an expert on SME financing, but I understand, for example, Hong Kong banks traditionally have a lot of expertise in supporting small firms in Hong Kong. You know, we have many small establishments in Hong Kong. So certainly, I think there are issues, for example, how the property rights can be guaranteed for smaller enterprises because they don't have a lot of properties. So for example, can cash flows be used as collateral? I think that China is actually doing a lot of work in fixing these problems. But I think Hong Kong banks can certainly share the experiences in these efforts. But as to the details, I don't really can help you. But I think, for example, at the moment, the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation is launching a study, you know, how to make SME financing easier in Hong Kong or to guarantee them. So that's maybe.
Can I just add something here? I'd rather thought that Mr. He was the beginning of Hodgkinson, but so I was ready to answer. I think you go back to that challenge I raised for the financial services industry. That's the biggest challenge as to the social utility of financial services, and it's the one which politically has got most resonance in Europe and North America, and you're probably well equipped to deal with it. But it's an important thing for establishing that financial services serves the real economy, and it serves the broader social interest, because there's more SMEs than there are large corporations, and that's where you're going to grow wealth creation in the future. And I think you probably need to look, and this is a point about my profession, you perhaps need to look a little more at where the mix of support comes from, because a lot of what you're looking for in that sector is advice and support by people who can't employ experts. They need to have the services of experts who understand their business and can help them purely as an economic matter when they can't afford to employ experts, and they can help them navigate the world of finance. And that really is important. It's why the accounting and legal professions, which are so important in Hong Kong, have a huge role to play, because they're essential. Essentially, there's the boundary between hard financial services about, yeah, here is some finance, and expertise as to this is how to access finance, this is how to minimise your working capital needs, this is how to manage your business. And there's a border there between hard financial services and soft, and Hong Kong should have a great advantage there because of the quality and the depth of the professional services talents it has.
Okay, I think our time has run out. I'm sure there are many more interesting questions, but thank you very much for the panelists' very inspiring comments. I think clearly from the comments, I think our prospect of sustainability as a financial center, I think we have a reasonable prospect to maintain. And I guess if you can hear from our two professors from our universities, obviously this question of maintaining the governance standard as to where you want to go is clearly a matter of continuing debate and exploration. There's a balance between whether you want to keep everybody out and keep the standard high, and whether you want to sort of allow a bit more diversities and all the rest of it. And for and for Robert over there, I think clearly, I think he is trying to raise our eyesight, but more importantly, I think with his sense of saying that we have this success anxiety, I think it is very good, because I think with the permission of the sponsor for us, I think we probably have to have more of these conferences and continue to have them next year. Thank you.